Here on the Catholic View for Women, where we give you news and views from a truly Catholic perspective. I'm Teresa Tomeo from EWTN Radio's Catholic Connection, along with my co-host Astrid Bennett Gutierrez, who's the Executive Director of the VITA Initiative, and of course Janet Morana, also a very familiar face here at EWTN from the Silent No More Awareness Campaign, and also of course Priests for Life, and for many years on Defending Life. And before we go into our topic, which we'll actually be covering not only in this show, but our next episode, we do want to give a big thank you to our wonderful pastoral director, Father Frank Pavone, National Director of Priests for Life, who was such a big help to us here every time we come and tape and reviews all of our program outlines, and really appreciate his insight and his knowledge. All right, now I'm really excited about these two programs. I love all of our shows, but I've gotten to know the author of this book about which we're going to be discussing, Subverted, How I Helped the Sexual Revolution Hijack the Women's Movement. It's just a really dynamic book, but her story is so compelling. Now, we do want to let you know that the guest that we're going to have on, Sue Ellen Browder, she actually worked for a time at Cosmo magazine. So some of the issues that are being brought up, we just want to put a little advisory out there that we do have some content that might be a little bit too out there for younger people. But overall, I think you're really going to get a lot out of these next two interviews, because this was someone who was inside the culture. It's interesting, she's about 10 years older than me, and so she was ahead of me in the secular media. And when I read her book, it was like, that was, that's how it all started. And I totally identified with her, and I bought into many of the messages that she was selling as a writer at Cosmo. But it's such an interesting story. It's an interesting book. She eventually converts, of all things, to Catholicism.
That's right. And recently we were all together at the March for Life in Washington, D.C. She was actually the keynote speaker at the Rose Dinner Banquet, and we had a great opportunity to catch up with her and ask her for an interview. So let's take a look at Sue Ellen Browder and see what she has to say.
So I was a little girl from New Hampton, Iowa. My dad owned a shoe store. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. And I wanted some adventures in my life. And there was a Rexall drugstore in our little town, and they had a magazine rack. And I saw those magazines, and I thought, oh, all those people who write for those magazines are rich and famous and happy, right? And so when I graduated from high school, I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to become a journalist. And I met Walter there, my beloved husband of 40 years. And at that time, I wasn't sure I was going to be a magazine writer. But Walter read an article, an interview with Robert Frost. Walter loved Robert Frost, the poet. And he says, somebody had to write this article. And you would be wonderful. You could write magazine articles. And I thought, he's right. I could. And that would be like those magazines on the racks of New Hampton, and I would be rich and famous and happy, right? So after I got a degree in magazine writing at the University of Missouri School of Journalism, which was one of the best journalism schools in the country, it was the oldest journalism school in the country, and we went to Los Angeles for a year just to party, and then after that, and I got pregnant that year, and I was fired for being pregnant. In those days, people don't remember that women were fired for being pregnant after 5 weeks or 5 months. I had to quit the job, and I had no guarantee that I'd have a job when I came back. So suddenly I thought, whoa, this women's movement I've heard about, I guess I need this. Because I'm being fired for being pregnant. I had no idea. I thought I was just going to be rich and happy and famous because I was so smart. And so now I needed the women's movement too. So I go to New York City and I get a job at Cosmopolitan magazine. And how did I get that job? It was just in the New York Times. And I applied, and I don't even think I knew at the time that it was Cosmo. There was just an editorial assistant job open, and I took it. And it was Cosmo. And I thought, oh man, this is the glamorous magazine. And when I was at the University of Missouri, I had actually studied Cosmo for our magazine markets class. And I had decided, I told my journalist friends in training that these anecdotes were so pat in Cosmo, they seemed to be made up. They were just too perfect. When I got to Cosmo, I found out that was true. We were making up those stories about those women who were jumping into bed every 5 minutes with men every time they met somebody. Those stories were all manufactured. They were made up. But here I am, and people say, well, you trained to be a journalist, and how could you start making up lies like that? Well, I just kind of thought, you know, this is the big city. This is the way things are. I guess, you know, this doesn't hurt anybody. I thought, what could this hurt people? Well, we now know how much it hurts people. And we also know that the lies that we tell ourselves are the worst lies of all. And so I became very locked up in writing for Cosmopolitan magazine, and I became one of their freelancers. And while I was at home, I had 2 children. I had a beautiful marriage. I was home baking chocolate chip cookies. I was home baking homemade breads, planting vegetable gardens, and then writing this Cosmo Claptrap for a living, because they did pay well. They paid very well. And I just didn't realize at that time what damage it was going to do to the culture. I didn't have much of a conscience, okay? Or I did have a conscience and it was bothering me, but I didn't know what it was. And so I had a lot of anxiety when I said I don't like writing. I had a lot of anxiety, I had a lot of depression, I had a lot of interior chaos going on, you know, especially around that career. Okay, and then about that time, and very, very shortly after I went to Cosmo, Roe v. Wade was passed. And the next year, I got pregnant for the 3rd time. When I had already had 2 children, and I'd already been fired for being pregnant. And at that time, there were still no laws protecting women from being fired for being pregnant. And Walter and I both were like, we can't handle this. We can't handle this with one income. He wasn't making enough. We were freelance writing. We were trying to make a living as writers. We couldn't do this. And we just had a new baby. I mean, the baby, how did I get pregnant so quickly? Well, one thing is I went back on the pill, but I'd gone to a doctor, and I told him this pill makes me depressed all the time, which it did. And he's like, well, you know, pat me on the head, nice little girl, you know. Aren't things, maybe things are not going right in your life. And I was furious with him, and I took that pill and I walked out, and I forgot you had to take it for a month before it was effective. So I was pregnant within a month on the pill again. And so then Walter and I, it was a year after Roe v. Wade, and I had an abortion. So at this point, you see, there's lots of chaos going on inside that doesn't connect with what you're doing at Cosmo. If you're going to say that Cosmo is lying to women, then you have to admit to yourself that you've had an abortion and you were lying to yourself. So there's a lot of things that go into play there. So what happened to my conscience? Well, a lot of things happened to it.
Boy, there's so much here to talk about. What's really, I think, compelling is she was saying that she had this, sort of had this dual life where she was raising children, she was, you know, planting a vegetable garden, baking cookies and baking bread,
right.
but she's also absorbing all these messages from the culture at the same time, and eventually to the point where she also succumbs to the, you know, feminist movement, radical feminism, and has an abortion.
Yes. Well, and she's being taught too by Cosmo that they're all making up the stories, so why aren't you doing the same thing? And she realized to be a successful writer for Cosmopolitan magazine, you've got to get in the groove here with the rest of them and sell sex, sell lies. I mean, the viewers have to realize that Cosmopolitan magazine is something that should not be anywhere near your children, your teenagers, or...
Well, they have a teen version of it they've had for years called Cosmo Girl, which is awful.
And the fact that if you go into your doctor's office and you see it laying around, you have to point out to the doctor, you know, I really don't want to see this in the waiting room, that my young teens can get a hold of this. And it's the #1 selling magazine all over, not just in the United States, but all over the world.
Right.
In so many languages.
Yeah,
you know?
I grew up, you know, going to the market and seeing the magazine on the racks, and it's so shiny and the beautiful woman on there. And I think all of us are taught to aspire to be that woman, to be beautiful and to be thin and to be this and that's happiness. So basically Sue Ellen is saying, I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be that woman, or the ones who make that happen. That's going to be my happiness.
Remember we were talking earlier, and that she was from a really, really small town, and she was still attracted to those magazines. And you were mentioning, Janet, being from New York, and I'm originally from the East Coast, Jersey City, big city, and then moving to a big city, Detroit. they think, most people think that we're the only ones who are going to get exposed to those things because you see more of it in the big city. That's true. But she was back where in Iowa, she said, and in a small town, and she walked into the corner drugstore and saw all of these glossy magazines, and right away was pulled in.
Well, and now with the internet, I mean, now
now
it's
cell
easier
phones, your smartphones, and
And Cosmo still enjoys this popularity of being, I'm sorry to use the expression, but I hear it often, the Bible for women.
Yeah,
You go there to learn what it is to be a woman, how to be successful, and success is based on what Sue Ellen says. It's based on what Helen Gurley Brown, also the founder of Cosmo, said was, it's based on sex and based on financial success in the world. That's going to be your happiness.
But what you have to consider, though, is Cosmopolitan magazine before Helen Gurley Brown was almost like the Ladies' Home Journal. It was more like for a woman, but like, just a family kind of magazine that could be in any home. That's what that magazine originally was when the Hearst publication company first published Cosmo. It was Helen Gurley Brown that took it in a totally different
direction.
Spin.
But everything was, as Sue Ellen said, it was all invented. It was all made up. So think about this, because in the book, and it's a great book, but we'll have the link for you because you can find it on our catalog. But in the book, she talks about the fact that all of a sudden they invented this Cosmo Girl, right? The Cosmo Girl was something that Helen Gurley Brown and Cosmo magazine invented, and Sue Ellen helped to promote through her articles. So the Cosmo Girl lived a very promiscuous life, and she went after men, whether they were single or married, and she was living supposedly this high life in New York City, making all this money and being very glamorous and having the latest clothes and the makeup and all this. So they invented this image of the Cosmo Girl, and when she went around, she says in the book, to try to interview people that had that lifestyle, there were very few. 5, 6, 7, 10 years later, so many women had bought into that message of the Cosmo Girl, and that's the woman's Bible. And then we started to see all these problems with sexually transmitted diseases and relationships breaking up. But it was invented. So talk about being sold a bill of goods.
That's what it was.
Huge.
And look how, too, because of working for Cosmo and for fear of losing her job, now she was climbing up in the ladder, so to speak, in her writing and getting success. Now she's pregnant again. And what creeps in but abortion?
Right.
I mean, I say if she wasn't working for Cosmo, she probably wouldn't, abortion wouldn't have entered her mind. But she had already been fired from a previous company from being pregnant. And the whole thing about Cosmo was how did pregnancy fit into the Cosmo world with the Cosmo Girl? It didn't. And so therefore, oh my goodness, what are Walter and I to do? We already have 2 children. We can't afford. I mean, how many times, Astrid, you and I have heard this line from women, who are considering abortion. Oh, we already have 2 children. I can't afford another one. That was the exact situation Sue Ellen was in, but because she was working for Cosmo, I think she felt my very job is threatened, part of our livelihood.
Yeah, and that's the title of the book is Subverted: How I Helped the Sexual Revolution Hijack the Women's Movement. Because the fact that you're getting fired for being pregnant is a real issue.
Right.
The women's movement wanted to help solve those issues, but but it was hijacked by the sexual revolution.
But how sad that legitimate reason to be upset, and there shouldn't be discrimination in the workplace, and the church talks about this, and we've mentioned it a gazillion times in this program, especially in the papal letter to women, Amelia Aristogitanum from John Paul II. But how sad that women were being discriminated against because they were having children. And so the answer, when the movement gets hijacked, is to, we're going to legalize it for you to kill your children.
Right.
Instead of solving the issue.
Actual issue.
Right.
Right. It's just, but her story is so compelling, as I mentioned earlier, and there's so much
history of
here.
how this all was unleashed on us. It's important to know the history so that we begin to heal what's going on in our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be right back to continue this discussion. Again, we'll give you the information on how to find the book Subverted: How I Helped the Women's Movement Hijack the Sexual Revolution. And that is Sue Ellen Browder, and she is featured on this episode of The Catholic View for Women. All the information is on our website, thecatholicviewforwomen.com. We'll be right back with more on this book and this fascinating testimony. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching The Catholic View for Women. I'm Teresa Tamio, along with Astrid Bennett Gutierrez and Janet Morana, continuing our conversation on a book that every woman should have, especially anybody who has teens in the home. The book is entitled Subverted by our guest, Sue Ellen Browder, and you heard just a little bit of her story of how she was very involved in promoting the lies of the radical feminists. And just, to me, it's very interesting how it really did affect her, even though she didn't want to believe it at first.
That's right. I mean, even when she said they made up the stories about
They
these
made
women
them up.
that were jumping from relationship to relationship and just free sex and all that, they were making it up. They weren't real women. And when you look at even Cosmopolitan and these other magazines now that are sold to young people, and even women our age buy them, I mean, nobody is that thin. Nobody really looks like that all the time, you know what I mean? But yet with photoshopping, and they're selling sex and selling more magazines, and really it's the buyer beware. You have to really warning to your young people, college age and above, that from high school on up, you should not be reading Cosmopolitan.
But they
magazine.
invented this person, or this
That's
image
right.
that was out there.
Right.
And then they sold it, and then we had the sexual revolution again. She helped them hijack it, as you know,
Well,
as she said.
It's basically propaganda.
Yeah,
is
it's
what it is.
propaganda.
I'd like to read something out of Sue Ellen's book here, and it kind of gives you a little glimmer into how did this all get started. And here's what she wrote. During my interview at Cosmopolitan, I carefully omitted any reference to our baby. She had just had that second child. And of course, I got the job at Cosmo. Freedom for women was in the air, but mothers were still in chains. Whereas Betty Friedan's message to women was, creative work of your own will set you free. Helen Gurley's brown message to single women was, hard work and sex will set you free as long as you don't have children. An author of the smash bestseller Sex and a Single Girl, published 1 year later, The Feminine Mystique, Helen saw the single girl as the newest glamour girl of our times and viewed children as more of a nuisance than a blessing. There you go. I mean, and then of course, if you're going to have children anyway, she said, never waste time feeling guilty. Never agonize too much, and have a lot of paid help at home, and never, ever, ever let them interfere with the long climb to the top.
And then you were mentioning, when we were talking about in preparation for the show, that Betty Friedan, who wrote The Feminine Mystique, actually had service at home. She had help. She had
Right.
maids.
Where
Maids.
in her book, Feministy, she paints a picture of this poor, housewife who's
Tied to
bored
the
out of her
stove
mind.
and the
My
sink.
life is
Yeah.
meaningless, and
Right.
yet her real life, she had all this help. And so really what she was creating, Sue Ellen makes a good case for this, is probably propaganda for the women's, actually for the sexual revolution, the beginnings of it.
Father Frank always says that that the whole abortion industry was built on lies, and it was. If you look at what happened with in both cases of Roe v. Wade and Doe v.
Doe v.
Bolton,
Bolton,
and so
right.
many people don't know that. So many people who've bought into the sexual revolution and the ideas of radical feminism, including especially you and I, Janet, because
Of
we're a little
course.
bit older than Astrid, we believed that it was real, and we were told that this was a way you had to live your life. And I was told that, and I so identify with Sue Ellen, even though Dominic and I never had children, but in terms of the pressure that was put on you in communications, the men weren't treated like that.
Right.
The men could live their lives, they could have their families, but the women were told, if you have children, and sometimes right out we were told, don't get married, don't have kids, because it's going to ruin your career.
That's right.
You know,
There's
and-
no
and-
place really. I mean, you were a news anchor woman,
Right.
Teresa, and really, where was there room to have raised
Right.
children and a family in that business? And
Right.
at the time, this was before your reversion, that you thought that was the greatest thing,
Right.
that you were this anchor woman in a Detroit market, and of course I can't have children.
But the
So
lies, the lies.
lies.
This we were lied to in this area. We were lied to with abortion. We were lied to with birth control. And the little snippets she gave about what the pill did to her, emotionally and physically. The
Right.
lies, the lies, the lies, and people have just accepted it. Let me read a quote from my book, Extreme Makeover, and this is in my chapter, Media Mania and the Feminist Mistake, as opposed to
Good play
on
Betty
words,
Friedan's
mistake.
So
Play
I'm
on
talking
words.
about the media and how much we have bought into this. And this is what we want you, the viewers at home, to think about and pray about. That should be added to their homework assignment. How much have you allowed the culture to infiltrate your mind, to impact you, to desensitize you to the beauty of who you are as a daughter of the King? We are slowly but surely being desensitized by the images and the messages. It's the old analogy of the frog in the pot of boiling water. If you tried to kill the frog by throwing him out of the pot of boiling water on the stove, he realizes he's in trouble and he jumps out. But watch what happens when you place the same frog in a pot of warm water and slowly turn up the heat. At first, he's comfortable. but before he knows it, he's cooked. When I look at the cultural landscape, I can't help but notice an awful lot of female frogs. We're telling our daughters, our sisters, our friends, come on in, ladies, the water's fine. In the meantime, we're all getting our gooses or our frog legs cooked. Before we know it, we have conformed ourselves, as Sue Ellen did, and I did, to this toxic culture of ours. And it's no wonder, considering the size and the powerful outreach of the mass media.
Yes, the mass media. There's a part in Sue Ellen's book that really spoke to me because she talks about when she's already a successful writer for Cosmo, that she's invited to the Oprah Winfrey Show. And the reason she's invited is because she wrote an article about how career women that had, gotten all the success and everything they wanted materially, now we're having a hard time finding a husband. So the article's title is basically why you should marry down.
Marry down.
Okay.
Yep.
But marrying down doesn't mean that you don't look at the man's financial success. What she meant was you can overlook even his, if he's an immoral man who's going to cheat on you, you just at least he's with you. So basically, she's really telling women to completely
settle
any standard you had out the door. And so she's filming this episode, and I think she comes to a realization during that filming of that episode that this is all smoke and mirrors.
It's all smoke and mirrors.
What are we selling?
It's all made up, right?
And when she was there, she had the following thought. Said, it occurred to me that by focusing almost exclusively on money, power, and career while denying women's deeper longings for love and a family, the modern women's movement got its priorities upside down and backward. I thought, as strong, independent women, we need to be speaking out loudly and clearly about the truth that success in life isn't just about careers, sex, power, and money. All these trappings are nothing without love. In fact, they're just that. Loveless traps that don't set you free, but only enslave you by getting you to chase after transitory pleasures that will never fulfill the deepest desires of your heart. And it spoke to me because I was invited some years ago to the Spanish version of Oprah in Latin America, which was called The Christina Show, about the topic of abortion. So you can see how it truly is smoke and mirrors, media. You never know what you're watching. I was there, and our panelists were all the pro-life women saying how they'd chosen life and they were happy, or they chose an abortion and were unhappy. Then they had another side of panelists, women, Hispanic women, saying they'd had an abortion and were happy, and they felt liberated. One young woman, which is a beautiful girl, said, I had an abortion 2 weeks ago, I feel great. And I thought, I'd never seen that before, but I guess they exist. After the show, we found out, because one of the girls felt so bad about something she'd said, she came up to us and said, I'm sorry for what I said. The producers told me to attack one of you because that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm an actress. We're all actresses. So all these post-abortive, for abortion women were actresses. Now, we found out, the viewers watching
didn't know.
No
idea.
Maybe they were shocked, but then they begin to accept the idea that there are women who have abortions who are happy and feel liberated. So you don't know what you're watching. This show had prestige. It was watched in every Spanish-speaking country.
Well, think about Oprah and the impact.
Yes, and that was years ago. Imagine now with the internet, how messages get out there. So we have to be so discerning. We have to be really well-formed. And I would say start by reading Subverted, your book, Extreme Makeover, and Janet, your book, Recall Abortion. You're going to learn the history so that we don't repeat this and begin to heal.
Sue Ellen starts in the 60s and the 70s. I pick up in late 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then Janet looks at this from, in terms of the whole abortion industry and how that's all tied in. So we try to give you all these different resources. So,
well, the bottom line is, Sue Ellen said, rich and famous makes you happy? Not. That's what the lie she was sold, and now she discovered, no. That's not what makes you true happiness. And
God is the only thing that's going to make any of us happy, that relationship with Christ.
So if you know anyone who has a subscription to Cosmopolitan, cancel it. Get it out of the waiting rooms of your doctor's offices.
Remember, we've been sold a bill of goods, especially women, by the culture. And we all have suffered from it. In some ways, we all bought into it.
And finally, monitor your children's internet at home. Please.
I have a whole chapter in here on the book, Extreme Makeover. But let's go over the homework assignment, Janet. Good stuff.
Okay. Well, number one, of course, we want them to read Subverted by Sue Ellen Browder, which is available at the EWTN Religious Catalog. And of course, number two, read Teresa's book, Extreme Makeover, also at the EWTN Religious Catalog. And of course, my book, Recall Abortion. They're all available at the Religious Catalog. And then number 3 would be the Catholic View for Women. Go to our website for more information. We always have up there all the homework assignments are there, plus discussion questions, because we really want you to delve into these topics. We're just lightly covering them here, but there's a lot more study that can be done. Also, we can sign up for our monthly newsletter. We like them to do that. And also look at Facebook, and we have a fan page, and like our Facebook fan page. And I'd like to mention that all these books, when they're on the EWTN religious catalog, it means they've been vetted through the theology department.
And they're all,
so these are sound books. They're
according to the
with,
magisterium. There's
nothing that's you know, this is actually good things to read to open people's eyes to how bad the culture. And a quick shout out to our patrons for the program, our Kitchen Madonna, also available at EWTN religious catalog, and the symbolism is just beautiful. And it's the kettle, which will nourish you in body and soul, the broom to keep the house clean and your mind and thoughts clean, keys to the kingdom, and also keys to keep the house safe. And as Mother Angelica always said, you keep the holy reminders around your home, and you'll be getting your way closer to the Lord.
Amen. 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 And really, just remember that the culture has sold us a bill of goods, especially women, and we're here to help you. That's why we have the Catholic View for Women. So glad you joined us. And don't forget, as Janet and Astrid said, all of this is on our website and our Facebook page. Our website is thecatholicviewforwomen.com. More with Sue Ellen Browder on our next episode. You don't want to miss it. So we'll see you, won't we, next time, right here on the Catholic View for Women. Thanks for watching.